this is my driveway, Earl. Earl. My driveway's for my car, not for you to do your three-point turns. Oh, real mature. You're gonna do that? Come on. Earl, this isn't done yet, okay? Earl. How you guys doing? Doing well. It's another beautiful day in Mr. Frank's neighborhood. Except for Earl. It'll have a real long day if Earl doesn't realize this is my driveway, not his driveway. You can't use my driveway to use three-point turns anymore. So, that's the main thing going on in Mr. Frank's neighborhood. Controversy as always. Me and Earl in a current feud. Other neighbor, Daryl and Pat. We'll see what sides they take on this. I think Daryl is Team Frank. I think Pat, Team Earl. We're going to see what happens. We got some Cold War stuff. Put on my Sperry's. America's Sperry's. We're in the old Teddy ball game jersey. Let's see what we got here. Okay. Hair looks great. Okay. Essential question. What early Cold War policy had the greatest impact on the outcome of the Cold War? I got 5 things I gotta go through. I have about 9 minutes left. I don't know where the camera's. There. How you doing? Well? Okay. 5 things to go through. Not a lot of time. All big stuff. Pick out which one you think has the greatest impact on the outcome of the Cold War. Good stuff going on. Let's do it chronologically. Where we last left off, we are on Act 4. We were in 1945. So, at the end of WW2, the big one, President Truman begins kind of de-escalating U.S. military involvement in Europe. Traditionally, what the United States has always done during wars is once the war's over, we drop our troops down, we bring everyone back home, and that's the way we do things. Stalin, that colossal piece of human trash and garbage, he recognizes this as weakness, and he begins plotting basically a takeover of Europe. And so one of the big problems U.S. policymakers have is they don't understand Russia, and they don't understand Stalin, and they don't understand the Soviet Union. Like, because they're playing with a different set of, like, rules. Like, the Germans, things like that, they were a westernized enough country where, even though we certainly never agreed with anything the fascist nations like Italy and Germany were doing, we could understand it because they were kind of imbibed with a Western way of doing politics. Russia wasn't, and we had a really tough time politically understanding what Russia's endgame was in all of this. And so you have that going on at one point in time in Europe where Russia is not allowing the free elections like they had claimed, and it's Churchill who comes over to the United States in 1946, gives a speech at the University of Missouri, go Tigers, and it says there's an iron curtain falling over the eastern part of Europe. What he was referring to was essentially that Stalin had placed an iron wall, figuratively, over Eastern Europe and was not allowing any Western ideas in. It was basically creating a Soviet communist empire. That combined with, in 46, Stalin also gives this giant speech where essentially he declares war on capitalist countries, creates a circumstance where President Truman is, what the heck do we do? So let's go first event, losing China. In 1946, now we don't officially lose China until 1948, and that's when it falls to the communists. But in 1946, what ends up happening is we stop supporting the Shanghai Check. Do you have a picture of him? Oh, that's it? Jeez. All right. Okay. So what ends up happening is people in the U.S. State Department who are advising Truman, they're pro-communist. And they tell Truman, don't trust Czech, trust Mao Zedong, don't give aid to the nationalists, and that's how China's lost. And so, check it off the list, one down, losing China is very much a direct result of Truman not getting proper information and communist influence inside the U.S. State Department driving U.S. foreign policy. So today, China, in the news quite a bit, communist government, China, Mao Zedong ends up killing around 60 million of his own people. There's huge long-term impacts. Korean War, China's a part of that. Vietnam, China's a part of that. Currently, who's the largest geopolitical threat to the United States in the world? It's China. And that all could have been avoided in 46. Second thing is, Well, and I talked about before, and I'm going moving faster, but I have 4 more things to get through. And that's 15 seconds that are now gone. The U.S. policymakers had no idea how to handle Russia. What ends up happening is that in 1946, the U.S. State Department has an analyst in Russia and is asking, like, why are they, like, not following through on all of the International Monetary Fund rules? And this individual from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, writes this long memo, and he's the first kind of U.S. diplomat to figure out, guys, the reason why we can't figure out what Russia is doing is because they're playing with a different playbook than we are. And it's called the Long Telegram. So the Long Telegram is event number 2. This is written by a guy named George Kennan. George Kennan from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Very interesting backstory. Was a very sickly kid, but again, that's something for another time. He basically lays out that we're completely wrong in our understanding of Russia, and until we understand the Soviet Union, we can't really understand what they're doing politically. And so he lays out 4 really truths. 1, the USSR, the Soviet Union, believes it cannot coexist with Western countries. That's point 1. They have no desire to coexist. 2, the Soviet Union believes it has to do everything possible, its leaders, everything possible to strengthen the USSR. 3, the Soviet Union will undermine all Western countries politically and strategically. Finally, all Soviet international moves are going to be negative and it's going to be destructive. And it's with this long telegram that President Truman reads and begins to realize that we need to come up with a different way of how we're handling the Soviet threat. And this leads to our third thing, check it off the list, the Truman Doctrine. This is something called logic of force. And what Kennan said was that the Soviets were very vulnerable to logic of force, which meant they would push and push and push and push, just like a bully, until that you got pushed back. And so he believed that the Soviets would keep pushing and pushing and pushing forward until someone stood up to them. And this is how the Truman Doctrine comes about. The Truman Doctrine, it's laid out into a couple, it's really more complicated than I'm going to break it down to. But what he basically says is any country who wants free and fair elections, we're going to be there to help you out. Why do you get involved in Korea? Truman Doctrine. In many ways, why do we get involved in Vietnam long term? Truman Doctrine. This idea that we will help any free democracy become a free democracy, and we will stop the Soviets from interfering in these elections. So that's part of the Long Telegram, and that goes into the Truman Doctrine, and that involves us in numerous places throughout the world. 3, in 1947, Europe is falling apart economically. And what ends up happening is General George Marshall, who was Chief of Staff during World War II, is now part of the State Department, Secretary of State. He comes up with a plan where let's basically rebuild Europe with US dollars, investing trillions of dollars into Europe to rebuild the country. On paper, it might seem like a really nice thing to do. In all actuality, it's a brilliant early shot in the war on communism. He understands that if we can rebuild these countries economically, and they're strong economically, they'll have no desire to turn to communism. And so the Marshall Plan begins to get on a roll in things. The Marshall Plan is widely successful. Not only that, there's a bit of politics involved in this too, where we actually offer the money with the Marshall Plan to the Soviets as well, and the Soviet bloc countries, which are all in the eastern part of Europe. And the Soviets say you can't take any of the money, so we kind of won politically on that as well. One of the other things, though, was in 1948, what kind of fast-tracked this was the Soviet Union put down a democratic election in Czechoslovakia. And so about 2 years after World War II, you can already see the Soviets are beginning to get more aggressive in how they're expanding their influence in the region, and now we're kind of trying to play catch-up how to stop this. And this leads into Event 4. So we can choose any of these. Letter X, or the policy of containment. So written under the name X, so trying to hide his identity, George Kennan wrote a long letter outlining what he would consider to be the perfect foreign policy against the Soviets, and that was containment, which basically meant everywhere they try to expand, you stop. Along with that also became National Security Document number 68. It's actually a pretty interesting read. This is the one that outlines the creation of the CIA, the National Security Council, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. These are all things done by Truman, and this goes along with letter X, containment's all part of the same thing, NSC number 68, where we need to fight the Soviets everywhere. Intelligence community, we need to reform our military, we need to create an alliance system of European nations, England, France, Western Germany, to combat this Soviet threat, because We have the ultimate trump card in our hands. We still have the atomic bomb. The Soviets, their big advantage is they have manpower. They've just had so many more troops than we do. Stalin sees all this, and what he decides is, I'm assuming the United States is not going to be willing to go to war over the city of Berlin. Stalin is banking on that. He sees the United States starting to catch up with a lot of this stuff. And he is sensing there's weakness in the U.S. That if I take Berlin, the United States will not have the guts to stop me. And if I can take Berlin, it's going to start opening up all of Europe to my aggression. The United States and Truman, they're left with a problem. What do we do? If we defend Berlin here, we might start World War III, a war we can't really win because we don't have enough troops in Europe to do. It'll force us to use nuclear weapons. And this is where I'll leave you guys off with a cliffhanger, that in 1948, we are this close to World War III. Over a city 5,000 miles away in Berlin, where the Soviets and Stalin have basically blocked off Berlin from the rest of the world, and the United States is stuck there, and President Truman is stuck there. What do? We can't let Berlin fall, because that'll give a bad message to all our allies, but also, we can't use military to defend Berlin, because Berlin is not where we're starting World War III. And so in 1948, we're this close to World War III. And that's where we'll end today. A little over 11 minutes, or 11 minutes 40 seconds. We have time for one quick question. Again, these are real questions, not blank sheets of paper I may or may not be reading. The question is from Skylar B. Skylar B asks, Mr. Frank, what is your favorite Christmas movie? Great question. In terms of for comedic reasons, Christmas Vacation, great movie. Obviously, Die Hard is the greatest Christmas movie of all time. Probably the greatest action movie of all time. It's a Wonderful Life, though. Get you right there. Okay, so answer the essential question. Give me some funny questions. Do mailbag this week. Good stuff. Hope you're enjoying the Cold War so far. Email me questions. Maybe you know something that can cut my hair. All right. USA, number one. Go America. Go Truman. Go George Kennan. Joseph Stalin, you're a colossal piece of trash.